This is AUGforums.com Real Talk. First, thank you to our sponsors, APS Payments, Kenzium, and DataSelf. You can learn more about how going to AUGforums.com/sponsors. My name is Tim Rodman, and I'm coming to you live on Wednesday, November 11th, 2020. This is Veterans Day here in the U.S., so thank you to all of you out there who have served in the United States Armed Forces. This is episode number 31, Michael Hansen, an Acumatica customer, with his perspective on community. Michael, thanks for coming on, and I'll let you go ahead and introduce yourself.
Oh, thanks for having me. So again, my name is Michael Hansen, as mentioned before, and I'm a system administrator for the Acumatica ERP system with my company, along with the data analysis component to push all of our reporting out. And I try to handle most of the troubleshooting. That's about it for what I'm doing here at the moment.
Awesome. And I'm curious, before your current company, did you work with any other ERP systems in the past, or what does your career path look like so far?
So before this, it was mostly CRMs, not ERPs. When I worked with a group of business brokers, Sunbelt business brokers, and then largely education after that. So finished up my college degree and then started this job. So this is really my first ERP system that I've gotten to play with, and it's impressive. I like the sandbox nature that it gives me the ability to control whatever I'd like.
You got lucky that you didn't have to start off with a 1980s product like I did.
Yeah, no, I have seen some of the other ones and heard horror stories from my peers at the Acumatica events, and I am so grateful that I'm in a system that'll bend to my will rather than forcing me to bend to its will.
Yeah, that's you got a little lucky there. So. Yeah, so today for those listening, Michael and I have corresponded a number of times on AUGforums.com and the forums, and as usual on these, I guess I'm kind of getting used to it. In the beginning, it's kind of weird, but you go from this just corresponding by typing to all of a sudden we meet each other for the first time via voice on this phone call, just a few minutes before we hit record. So. For anyone else who would like to come on here, it's pretty simple. We just jump on, we chat for 5 minutes or so. That's meeting verbally for the first time, and then we just hit record and have an unscripted conversation. And what we did talk about, just emailing back and forth is, and this could be a situation that other people are in, your company, Michael, just wasn't comfortable going into the details of the implementation, which is totally fine. And so we can still have a great conversation focused on something else, and that is your thoughts on community in general. And I thought you'd be a great one for this because you've been a very active participant on AUGforums.com.
Oh, I absolutely love the AUG forums. I am not going to lie. They really keep me out of hot water sometimes because it's a give and take relationship with the community. And if you don't have the community, you're kind of left swinging in the dark, or you've got to go through your reps, and they're a little expensive along with time consuming to work with. I'm super thrilled that our community is so responsive in its feedback. It really sets it apart because I've heard from a lot of other places when you're stuck in a box by yourself, you end up kind of cutting corners or leaving out features that you want. With the community that we have here, especially on AUG forums, I'm able to ask questions about what I want to put forward and see if that's even feasible. And if it is, I'm generally directed to the resources I need to accomplish that goal. And that's something that's really, really made my job a lot easier than it could be. I'm able to ask questions about what I want to put forward and see if that's even feasible. And if it is, I'm generally directed to the resources I need to accomplish that goal. And that's something that's really, really made my job a lot easier than it could be. So I super appreciate the outlet in that area.
It almost seems like from your perspective that having a strong community around an ERP product is just as important, maybe even more important than a product itself. I mean, we like the Acumatica technical side of things, but if you think of it from your perspective, how would you weigh those two things, having a really good product, or maybe if you had a really good product with no community and you had to choose between that and an old legacy product with a strong community, where do you fall on that?
Oh, I would definitely take the strong community every day of the week. Our system has been so highly customized that it barely reflects what it is out of the box, but that's kind of the great thing. And as soon as you get going, as long as you know a little bit of C# and you're not afraid of Stack Overflow, you can make serious movements, especially considering the ability to import data and flex your own fields on the fly. I mean, it takes me about 10 minutes to build a new field, implement an import scenario into that field, and then just start ripping things out of Excel and pushing it up into the system so that we can report on that data. And that is the ability to be real time like that. I think that is invaluable for my company.
You strike me as a grab the bull by the horns kind of person. You sound very hands-on with the system, and that's awesome. Sounds like maybe there's a correlation between that and someone who really appreciates a strong community.
Yeah, I could agree with that sentiment. I think if you look at the AUG forums and you look at who's posting, most of those guys are pretty happy to get into the mud, right? Because you can do surface level customizations pretty easily, but if you're willing to throw a little bit of C#, and it's not, I would say that it's definitely dependent on how much you want to get dirty for how much you're really going to involve yourself with these conversations.
That's great. I think so. Staying focused on the community side of things, first off, without getting into the details of your Acumatica environment, how long have you been working with the product, and how long have you been involved in the AUGforums.com community?
See, I've been working with the product just a little over 3 years now. Yeah, about 3.5 years. And it's been about, then I guess it's been almost 2 years or so on the AUG forums then, because it wasn't shortly after I started that one of my reps, actually, one of my VARs, had told me that he was using your forums to look at some stuff and said I might have an interest in going there, and just started rolling from there. Ever since then, I've been very pleased with the output that I've gotten from the community, and been more than happy to give feedback to those who are finding them from the community, and been more than happy to give feedback to those who are finding themselves in similar situations where you've just hit a wall and want to get over that hump. So
that's awesome. You strike me as the kind of person who, when you got the coin jar at the checkout at the gas station, that's take a penny, leave a penny, you're the kind of person who doesn't just take a penny, but you also leave a penny.
Yeah, generally speaking, I mean, that's kind of how I like to look at it. You generally get what you put in. And I found that if you really do participate, people tend to respond to you faster as well. So if they see that I'm in there helping people, when I finally say, hey, I'm also in that same position and I would like assistance as well, it tends to come in a timely manner, and it tends to be packaged appropriately. And that is critical for pushing these systems, because you don't want to wait too long or your superiors are going to get angry. And you certainly don't want half the information, or you're going to break something and you're going to be very upset with yourself. And the ability that we have in the AUG forums to communicate back, an excellent vehicle for making sure that both of those criteria are met.
So right before we hit record, I was checking to see if you knew about the new official Acumatica community, and it sounded like you didn't know about it. So I think this is actually going to be a really cool unscripted conversation here. I actually wrote up a blog post on this with some of my thoughts. And so I've got a bunch of questions for you about this, but let me give you some background first. So the AUGforums.com site is just something I run independently. And I started when I first started working with Acumatica back in April of 2013. I started writing blog posts just as a way to share information, and honestly as a way to take notes for myself and be able to search them with Google rather than look for Google or Word documents or whatever. Honestly as a way to take notes for myself and be able to search them with Google rather than look for Google or Word documents or whatever local way of taking notes I might come up with. I found that blogging was just the best way for me to take notes. And then things were rolling for a couple of years, and had a lot of people starting to find the site and appreciate the information there. So then I started the forums part of it in May of 2017, a little bit over 3 years ago. And really the way I looked at it in the beginning was kind of like a micro blogging, where I might have some information out there that I want to share, but not enough for a full blog post, or I just didn't want to take the time for a full blog post. For me, it takes like 4 to 6 hours to go end to end on a blog post. And sometimes you just want to put a quick dump of info out there. And so I looked at the full micro-blogging way of doing things. But, it's now been a few years, and I think what has happened is it's sort of become a little bit of a support tool. I think it sounds like you're using it that way somewhat. And that
Oh, absolutely.
It's not just a way to share information, it's a way to ask questions, right? And then it all comes down to, well, how quick do I get a response? And it sounds like you've actually had a good experience. I think I actually review every single post on there. It takes me a while to get to them. So right now I'm like over a month behind on the posts I haven't looked at. And a lot of times there's just no response because it's hard to respond to everything without like a big group of people looking at it, right? And so what Acumatica just did in the last couple of months is they just launched their own community forums. And you can find it at community.acumatica. And they're responding to things a lot faster than on augforums.com. So definitely check that out, and especially for you, Michael, if you're getting into the weeds with C# and stuff like that. I still have a question mark. I'm not sure myself how much is better on Stack Overflow versus on the new Acumatica community. But, I think try both and you'll kind of feel out where something's appropriate for Stack Overflow, where it's appropriate for the new Acumatica community. But, that has left me on augforums.com with some question marks. What do I do now on the forums? Do we just shut them down? But what I've decided to do going forward is just pare down the focus to be focused on the reporting tools in Acumatica. So both the forums and the blog content I'm now going to focus that specifically in the area of reporting, just because that's the area that I like the most, and I think I'm the best at that area. So
I actually enjoy the report writer myself.
The report designer, or what's your favorite way of doing reporting? I'm curious.
Oh, the report designer. I hate using the generic inquiries. I feel so restricted every single time. I just want a blank sheet where I can put whatever groupings I need and make the data exactly the way I want it to go.
Interesting. I'm the opposite. That's interesting.
Really?
Well, that's a good check mark in the positive column for report design.
Yeah, I just like the open slate version that I can start however I want, build it in the method that makes sense to my brain. Whereas the inquiry is kind of built in a linear fashion almost, where you kind of want to follow through their steps. And some of the problem solving that my company's needed to do has required me to look a little bit outside of their steps. And some of the problem solving that my company's needed to do has required me to look a little bit outside of the box. And again, when you get into complex grouping, that's when the inquiries start to break down, because we were trying to apply like HTS codes to incoming materials, that kind of stuff.
Interesting. Oh, well, that's a good sign for a report designer. It's got a fan out there.
Yeah, I know I'm in the minority. I'm fully aware that most people are not super pleased on that one. So
definitely check out the new community, and maybe we can touch base again to get maybe in a couple of months do another one of these and just kind of get your thoughts on the experience between the two different sites. And I wanted to pick your brain just on community in general. So on augforums.com, the forums and blog, I'm now going to focus those on reporting tools for now. But I think there's another critical piece, and that is independence. So Acumatica is still a wild card in that it's a new product. But if you look at ERP systems and I think CRM systems as well, traditionally, you've got these products that are great and collaborative in the beginning, and then a lot of times they just turn into money makers, and they lose a transparency that they had in the beginning. And so part of another big factor I think that augforums.com brings to the table is that it's independent. It's not tied to the software publisher, so we have a greater level of transparency on there. And I'm just curious to get your take. Is that something that would think of your CRM products or other things you've seen? Is that something that's valuable?
Yeah, absolutely. So not personally, but I have been around D365, and I've noticed how that goes. That once you're out of implementation and the development teams, not personally, but I have been around D365, and I've noticed how that goes. That once you're out of implementation and the development teams kind of leave you, you're just kind of left hanging. And if you want changes, you almost have to really scream for them. And after that, it seems like they just want to collect their subscription fees. I haven't really found that here. In fact, my VARs, I'm still getting more tasks from them. We are working on time-phased inventory reporting right now. I want to see my inventory in weekly buckets, so they merged in all demand and all purchasing into one giant table for me that I can report off of. This is the kind of flexibility I'm looking for instead of just a static system. You know, we give you ABC, good luck. Like, well, I want more. And this really opens up that. And again, like with the forums that you have, and I actually loaded up the community forums while we were talking. These are both amazing outlets to keep you on that edge where you want to keep looking, and not just because you had something you wanted, but because when you're looking at answering other questions, you might realize you missed something that makes a difference to my company, and I need to implement that.
That's a great point. I've experienced the same thing. And you're going out looking to help other people, but you actually get the help yourself just because of the types of questions they're asking that maybe you never thought of before.
Oh, yeah, it's definitely not just a loss of time to go help others, in my opinion. I think there's a benefit to my company, and honestly, my superiors, they have never complained because I always come back going, oh, hey, check out this. I found something new. I think we should do this. And they'll be like, yeah, go for it. Go sit in the cave and figure that out. I'm like, great. So, loving it.
So your company actually, well, maybe they're not like approving a certain amount of time for you to spend on forums, but they're not opposed to you spending some work time on the forums. Sounds like.
Definitely not. And so I am salary, and they don't monitor my hours. I get my job, my tasks completed, and they don't yell at me. And as long as I'm implementing, so it's kind of sink or swim. Like, all right, if I don't do it, no one else will. So here's where we're at. And my users are constantly telling me things they want to have changed or added, like adding things to the PO lines. You know, hey, they don't show my weight of an item. I want to see the weight. I want to see the cube on the line. Great, I can add those things. I want to know how many items are in a case on every single line. Like, yeah, I can add all this data. Let's get this pushed in so that you can see this on the fly instead of having to jump back and forth between screens.
That's great. You know, I'm just thinking here, you know, if there's someone listening to this who maybe doesn't have quite as a supportive boss at the company they work for, you know, maybe we could come up with this pre-written letter, you know, that is a case to be made for why you should let your employees spend some time in an Acumatica community.
There really is a good argument to be made there. I mean, let's be honest. Like the first time I had it, I didn't even know what I didn't know. You know what I mean? You are ignorant to certain areas until somebody else goes, hey, I've been totally doing this. You're like, that's a thing you can actually do. Like right now I'm working on adding those Excel imports. You can add those to a screen. I didn't even know that was an option. Like I knew that we had them, that you can import from Excel, like the lines on a purchase order. I didn't know that you can choose to add that to other screens when it doesn't already exist. And so now I'm working on adding that to some of the other screens for some of my other employees that are like, hey, if I could just upload all this data in the lines instead of typing it by hand, I would save hours of my day. And I'm like, well, that has a solid ROI. Give me a minute to research that.
That's a great example of I hear other people use the same phrase, I don't know what I don't know. And that's the scariest part of it. And so, you know, to your point, seeing what other people are asking and getting that broader perspective on Acumatica really helps you feel more comfortable in the system. Would you agree?
Oh, one
part of it. And so, you know, to your point, seeing what other people are asking and getting that broader perspective on Acumatica really helps you feel more comfortable in the system. Would you agree?
Oh, 100%, because I start to get a more well-rounded view. At first, you're kind of swinging in the dark. You know a very small subset of the entire system, but as your subset approaches the entirety of the set, you stop panicking about the little things you need to change, and it just starts to become a matter of course. So the first time I wrote the C# code on the back end, I was so worried I was going to break everything, but you do that a couple of times, and you're like, all right, this isn't so bad. You know, I take a backup. I work in the test company. I'm on a local copy. I'm not going to hurt anything. just keep pushing forward and then work with the support community, and you'll find that other people are doing the exact same things you are, and oftentimes even making the exact same errors. So it's not like you're the only fool in the box. Trust me, we're all out here and we're all making mistakes all day, right? So it's nice to have that community to back you up when you go, I did something, I fixed it, and somebody goes, hey, just uncheck these boxes or delete that line of code. And it's like, thank you very much.
Maybe that'd be a good point to make in that letter to your boss if you don't have that support. What I'm hearing is there's a correlation between community and confidence, in that if you're just working with a support person, whether it's your VAR or whether it's someone in Acumatica support, I don't know, I'm curious if you agree with this. For me, psychologically, there's a difference between a one-on-one conversation and a put it out there for the whole world to see conversation. Even if I only have a conversation with one person, in that the whole world can see it conversation, for some reason, psychologically, I have more confidence in that conversation than I do in the one-on-one conversation. I'm curious if you have the same psychological experience on your end.
Actually, I completely agree with that. We've
experience on your end.
Actually, I completely agree with that. We've in your forums, as I'm sure you've seen before, we've posted the wrong answer back and forth. And it's fantastic when you have an open world community, because you know that if the answer is right, people generally move along. If the answer is wrong and somebody knows it, they tend to be quick to jump in and make that conversation, go the right direction. And like you, what is it? Sean Slavin, I think, is another one who's on there. Fantastic help. So
yes,
it is awesome to know that I've got like eyes on the document, even if they're not speaking. I know that somebody out there who probably knew the answer has looked at this at least once or twice and has gone, yeah, that's right. Or they're going to jump in and say, no, don't check that. All you've done is this, and you didn't actually go the full distance. You need to do these as well. And it's like, oh, thank you. And no, I feel a whole lot more confidence with that than speaking to a single human being and hoping that that person is right and not mistaken on some topic.
And I think
I feel much better talking to my superiors about these type of topics when I know that I've had a lot of eyes, right? Like there's a lot of movement on your forums. There's a lot of eyes looking at things. And likewise on the community Acumatica forums, I can see right now that Gabriel's one of their top leaderboard people, and that guy really knows his stuff. So I'm stoked to see that the people that are moving are names that I'm familiar with, which means that I know that they know what they're talking about. It's not just going to be a random person who has no clue. And that means when I go to my superiors to pitch something, I'm not going to look like an idiot a week down the line when I go, so that totally doesn't work, and now everything's broken. So no empty promises.
That's a great point about reputation too, and that I think some people have the concern about providing the wrong answer, right? But to me, the more volume you get out there, even if you do provide the wrong answer at some point, it's still, I don't think it destroys your reputation personally. I think participating shows something. And then the more you participate, the more you provide good answers, and your reputation, it's not like reputation to me is not a metric. It's just like what you said, you recognize Gabriel, you have interacted with him in the past, and it's just something that you decide somehow in your brain whether you're going to trust someone or not on what they propose.
No, I completely agree. And the approach matters too, because if you state something as a fact versus say, hey, I think this is the answer, I think that changes the dynamic that somebody like kind of rates you on that system. Because I've had a lot of people tell me, I think this is the answer, and I'll try that out, and that's great, but I won't sit there and pretend that that's got to be the end all be all answer. And I've had other people that are very confident with their knowledge in the field, and they go, no, I've done this before. I have examples. This is the answer. And so even if you're wrong and you post something, state, hey, I think this is the answer, to me, I find that completely legitimate. Hey, you thought it was the answer, and you just happen to be wrong, because we're all wrong eventually. I mean, to be honest, I think I spent half my job being wrong. So, as long as you're trying, I don't really care. I just want to see effort and that people are willing to learn from their mistakes that have come before. And from what I've noticed, that tends to be the norm.
That is a great point. And actually, for me, that's one thing I personally struggle with a little bit with Stack Overflow. I haven't been on there a ton because I haven't gotten real heavily into the C# like you have. Have you been on Stack Overflow?
Oh, yeah, when I wanted to make searchable fields in a selector.
So
that
like,
required Stack Overflow.
For those who aren't aware of Stack Overflow, it's a general developer community. But then Acumatica, it's actually, I don't think Acumatica had to do anything special to do this, but if you tag a post with the word Acumatica, anything special to do this, but if you tag a post with the word Acumatica, there's a way you do that in there, then it all gets accumulated against the Acumatica tag. So it's really just like using Facebook or Twitter or some other platform, but it's specific for developers, and there's a lot of Acumatica developers on there. And so one thing I struggle with personally on there is that it's very much oriented towards the right answer, right? In that you upvote, you downvote people's responses, and it's very metric driven. It's very much you're right or you're wrong. Has that been your experience on there?
I'm going to have to agree with that. So I used it in my college, and I've also used it professionally. It is very, they will dogpile on you if you're wrong. They want the right answer, and they try to hide the bad answers via downvoting, and they try to push the good ones up via upvoting. Not that they want the right answer, and they try to hide the bad answers via downvoting, and they try to push the good ones up via upvoting. Not that's necessarily a bad system, but it can be a little hard to get into. I won't lie, I was a little nervous the first few times posting on Stack Overflow.
It can be harsh, right? And
yeah.
I think actually it's maybe an appropriate it's an appropriate way of doing it for developers, because it's just sort of the nature of developers. I think it's more harsh. It's more, I don't care how you feel. We're going to get the right answer or not. But it can be scary.
Yeah, it really was. They don't care about your feelings.
Now, I will say it's more pleasant than if you've ever tried to comment on a Wikipedia article. Oh, that is really harsh. Have you ever tried doing that?
Oh, yeah, those are so great. No, but yeah, Stack Overflow is totally usable. As I phrased it to my friend, it's a big boy tool. So they say that you mistagged your post because they really care about the tags you use, like Acumatica, and then specifically mentioning which parts of that are you working in. That kind of stuff can get really tense and terse. But in the end, what it does is it makes it very streamlined. If you go in and search for a problem and you find a post about it, probably 99% of the time, the answer you're looking for is sitting right there, and it has the most upvotes. It's very easy to find. You don't need to read the whole post. And that has a lot of advantages, especially for a developer who's on the move. Like, you don't have a lot of time to be reading things. You just need to keep moving. It's not generally an open discussion so much as it is, I have the question 2 + 2, and if somebody says 5, everyone yells at them, and somebody posts 4, and everybody upvotes that guy. It's just kind of how it works.
That's a great way of putting it. That's exactly what it is. So I like that for the developer stuff. I think I don't think it's a great format for the rest of Acumatica, because if you think about an ERP, a lot of it is, not a lot of it, it's a back office system, right? And most of the people working in these systems are introverted kind of people, right? Like, I'm that way myself. Like, you're not really wanting to step your foot out there. If you were, you'd probably be in sales or you'd be doing something that's not back office related. And so I think, coming all the way back to your point about how you ask a question, I think it's a great point to make when you're dealing with forums, no matter what kind of forum it is. If you're nervous about chiming in, I completely agree with you. It all comes down to how you chime in. You don't have to come across and say, I've got the right answer. You can even just ask another question. A lot of times that's really helpful. Like, someone asks a question and you don't even respond with an answer. You ask another question. Like, you just kind of dig into some of the requirements. Well, are you asking about this area? Or are you asking about this area? And sometimes just asking questions helps the person with their original question.
Oh, I completely agree, especially in regards to the report writer. We've had that conversation come up many, many times on your forums. And oftentimes it immediately starts out with just a wall of questions back, because we're not quite sure exactly what your problem is. And sometimes the question is the answer, like, hey, what kind of mail settings do you have? And they'll be like, I didn't even know we had mail settings. That's what I've done wrong. That's why it's not emailing properly, Like, what's your group structure? Did you put your variables in the right order? That kind of stuff matters. And if you didn't answer or mention that in your first post, oftentimes people follow up with, hey, can you show me that? Can you let me see this? And the moment you start to look into it yourself, you frequently find your own answers. I know I've done that myself before in the report writer, where people are like, hey, what about this, this, and that? And as soon as I started looking, I was like, oh, I totally screwed that up. That's what's wrong. It's me being a fool again. Sorry about that. So it's kind of nice.
I like that. I've experienced the same thing. Yeah, you're asking questions, and really that's a consultative approach to things. If you just take something at face value with I think what doctors call the presenting problem, and you just try to solve that, then you're not really taking a consultative approach to it. When you start to dig in and you question the original presenting problem, not in a harsh way, but you're just in a more of an educational, trying to learn about it more way, a lot of times that sheds a lot of light on the original problem.
I also find it helps keep me from looking like the fool when I'm making the conversations too. I've done this before in my work environment where I receive an email and I jump to a conclusion that this must be the problem, and then I find out it's actually completely unrelated to what they posted. And if I had asked questions rather than trying to give an answer, right now we'd be closer to a solution and I wouldn't look like a fool in the email. So I can completely agree with you that asking questions about the problem before you attempt to solve it can give you a more holistic view and set you up for success rather than failure, right? And everybody wants that path to success.
So great advice for people interacting in forums, or especially for those hesitant to interact in the forums. Great entry point is just being a part of the conversation, not providing answers, but just helping to move the conversation along, and a great way to build your reputation. So we've got forums. We've got really three venues right now. We've got augforums.com, which I think we're going to see moving forward. You're probably noticing as you're scrolling through right now on the new official community, there's a lot more activity just because there's a lot more people who are moderating it. And, we'll see how it goes with focusing things down or reporting on augforums.com. But either way, we've got forums, and then you've also got Stack Overflow. If we step back then and start thinking about it from your perspective, outside of forums, what other things do you look for in a community?
Honestly, I like the events that Acumatica hosts. That really has it's opened up my eyes to different industries and different problems, especially at the end when they turn over to questions. When you're at one of those little summits and they finally stop talking about all the new and shiny things, which, no offense to them, about half of them I don't care about because it's just not going to be pertinent to me or my company. But when people start to ask questions back, you start to see the nuances and the changes they've made. And that starts to give me more ideas in my subset as well, where I'm like, hey, my company could utilize that as well. And then I'll find a connection to talk to. This gets me a new person. That's another network connection, right, that you're going to need at some point. And you go talk to that guy and you're like, hey, I see we have a similar problem. Here's what I'm looking at. Here's what I've implemented. What have you done to solve it on your side? And oftentimes I found that I'm behind. And I'm like, oh, well, sounds like I'm feeling more engaged with the product rather than just some random guy, some random company in the middle of nowhere hoping somebody helps me.
So it sounds like were you at the recent summit in Las Vegas earlier this year?
I tried to go to that one. My superiors wouldn't let me. No, I've been to some of the more local ones out here in Portland, Oregon, Seattle, Washington, that kind of stuff. But I'm looking to get to some of the bigger summits because I would like to meet up with some of the faces that I've met through a lot of the forums that aren't in my local area.
Okay, so your experience so far has been a local user group.
Generally speaking, yep, Pacific Northwest area.
And then maybe also like a fall roadshow event where like an R2 launch event.
Absolutely. So that has been largely what I've gone to, is like the launch events, and I've really enjoyed the type of material that they present and the way that they present it, and the fact that you can engage launch events. And I've really enjoyed the type of material that they present and the way that they present it, and the fact that you can engage everybody because it's a smaller group. You know what I mean? It doesn't feel like I'm lost in a sea of people. I don't know how the other events are around the U.S., but the ones in the Pacific Northwest seem to be reasonably sized where you could probably meet and shake everybody's hand without just losing all your day.
Gotcha. And so that sounds like that's the highlight of the event for you, is being able to talk to people one-on-one.
Yeah, I mean, I'm going to read the patch notes, right? I mean, don't we all? I mean, if you're at this level of nerd, you're probably reading every update note like the rest of us going, well, Yeah, I want that. No, that's going to be bad. That's going to break a report. This is going to be something else I'm going to want to work with, that kind of stuff. So I definitely read all that information myself, and it's nice to see it presented too in live time. So, I mean, I won't knock that. Reading won't get you everywhere, but yeah, definitely enjoy meeting up with the people there. But yeah, definitely enjoy meeting up with the people more because it lets me know who's struggling where. Am I the only one who's loving the new accounting module, or is everybody hating it? What's going on? And I can get a feel for that. And are we going to get changes down the road? Because the higher ups are also at these events, and you can talk to them directly and be like, hey, I'm having these issues, or, I worked with an integrator and it didn't go smoothly, and they'll help you to walk through that. And I find that to be super valuable.
I'm curious if you attended the R2 virtual launch event a couple months ago, I think it was.
I did not. I had intended to, but we had a small emergency come up with the company and I was unavailable.
So now that we're, for the foreseeable future at least, in this COVID world, and the in-person get-togethers are on hold for now, I had an interesting experience with the virtual launch event, Acuconnect event. Did you attend that one last week?
No, I did not.
So
largely due to COVID, our business has changed a bit, and we got slow, and now we are so busy. Everybody's pretty backlogged right now.
Gotcha. Well, thanks for making the time today. I really appreciate it.
Absolutely.
So just my take on the two different events. The virtual launch one was very one-sided. It was the keynote presentation style, right? And, to your point, great to get that information. For me, though, I felt like afterwards I could have just watched the recording, right? And comparing that to the Acuconnect event last week, it was much more interactive. They had a chat window that you could drop in. You could respond to poll questions. And I think right now, comparing that to the Acuconnect event last week, it was much more interactive. They had a chat window that you could drop in. You could respond to poll questions. And I think right now, at least my take on this is interactivity is a key component of any type of event, because it's not just about the presentation. If you think about the in-person event, what you appreciate most is being able to interact with people. And we're all trying to figure out how to best do that in an event style in our COVID world that we're living in right now.
Oh, I completely agree with your sentiment about the interactivity being key. So if somebody's presenting to me and I get stuck on part of the topic, or my brain doesn't process something properly, I mean, we all do this. We've all done it in classroom settings. You turn off. Like, I don't understand the math anymore, so I'm clearly not going to get the solution. I'm going to stop listening to this and catch up on the next problem. When you have an interactive group, you cannot sit in there just staring at the screen for 10 minutes waiting for the next topic. You're actually able to re-engage, and your question probably isn't just you. I mean, like every professor's ever told you, you're not the only one with a question. If you have it, please ask, because somebody else has it and they're just not asking yet. So I think those interactive systems are going to be the new norm, and I'm trying to get on board myself. I know it's a little frustrating because I do enjoy the people element, and it's a little lacking, but considering what we've been dealt at the moment with COVID, I'd say it's a fantastic substitute.
Yeah, and in some ways, especially on the presentation side, when you're in a room and someone's presenting, it's rude to be mumbling to the person next to you, right? But when you're
absolutely.
in a online forum, you could just be chatting. It's no problem. You don't interrupt them at all. So in that sense, it's better. You're never going to replace the in-person, and I hope we get back to that as soon as possible. But it'll I think be interesting to build our skills in that the online.
It works rather well, and I completely agree in the sentiment that I'm not interrupting anybody, because that oftentimes is the reason that people, like in a classroom setting, won't raise their hand, or in a convention setting, you're not going to talk to the guy next to you because you don't want to look like that guy, right? You don't want to be rude. So getting around that is difficult. Adding a chat interface is a fantastic solution. In fact, I can still listen, I can still record, all that fun stuff's going on, but I'm also able to ask questions without wrecking everybody's day. And I think that's a fantastic outlet for that type of situation.
So I'd like to pick your brain on an idea, that something I've been wanting to do. It's a matter of how exactly to do it, and the sequence, the cadence, I should say, how often to do it. So, yeah, I think we've got the new community forum, which I think is going to be where most of the forum traffic moves to. On augforums.com, we've got this podcast moves to. On augforums.com, we've got this podcast going. I like having these in-depth one-on-one conversations. I'm going to keep that going. And I've just been looking for other ways to help foster community in general. And where does augforums.com play a role? Where does the new community play a role? Where does Acuconnect play a role, etc.? And so I had an idea for a while that I've worked on a little bit, wanted to pick your brain on it, and I would call it augforums.com live. And my original idea was to be nothing more than interacting the same way that you normally interact in the forums, but doing it as at a designated time, date and time. And to help that, I created something that I call the unseen list. Which is just a list of all the discussion topics. And it's stuff that either you have not liked the most recent post, or you are not the most recent post. So you get a list of everything that's happened that day on an augforums.com live day. And if you respond to a discussion, it would drop off the list. Or if you like the most recent topic in a discussion, it would drop off the list. And so that was my idea of kind of a way to do a live online interaction. Then I had the experience last week at Acuconnect where you had the chat window off the side. And that was good, but then it doesn't survive the session, at least as far as I can tell. So, I'm curious your take on those two on those two different ideas. One would be doing just a pure chat window where it's very flat. It's not organized by discussion topic. And when you're done, it's done. Versus doing more my original idea, which is just corresponding in the forums. That way it survives the event. It's organized by discussion topic. What do you think about those two paths?
See, I'm big on everything in writing because I like that it's archived. It's saved. It exists somewhere. I mean, even if you delete it off your forums, I can probably go find it on the Wayback Time Machine website, right? I mean, it's out there. Once it hits the web, it exists. And I think that there's a big advantage to that. As for getting together at a specific time, my schedule is generally pretty rigid, so that actually works out well that I could bucket in that I wanted to do something on a specific date at a specific time. I don't generally have the option to flex very easily. And if I saw it coming, I could say, hey, we're all going to sit down and try a big push, and we're going to go work on these specific topics. I like the idea of the unseen list, but in my particular position, rather than seeing everything, I'd almost rather have a targeted event. Like, we're going to go over just report writer questions on this one, or we're going to go over and, play with customization projects and work on that for this session and work on those topics. And this way you could target the people who feel that they're more confident in that area and that they would be able to better help. Because there are areas that I'll admit, like, I'm weak in the accounting module. You put me in there, I'm just going to flounder very quickly. Like, financials aren't my bag. But if you told me that you wanted to go talk about C# or the report writer, all day, every day, man, that is my bread and butter. I'm happy to do that.
That's great feedback. I really like that. I've been struggling with that thing, and I think you just helped me crystallize what the problem, what my struggle has been. And it's a restaurant where you order something and it comes prepared. I think forums are great, like a buffet. They're actually better than a buffet because the information doesn't expire like the food does. But it's this big hodgepodge and smattering of things, whereas a sit down is much more focused and you get something delivered to you that's more prepared. And it's even more so in the information area. So the restaurant analogy is a little bit of a bad analogy in the sense that when you go to an event where someone's presenting something, you're getting this nice prepared walkthrough, step 1, step 2, step 3. You go to the forums and it's just all this information all over the place, right? And so
yeah, it can be hard to find what you need.
I'm curious then, if we did something that was just focused on a particular topic, the next logical step, I think, is to not only have a specific date and time where people log in forums and are communicating with the forums, add a presenter who is presenting something on that topic. Then you could still have your typing chat stuff going on, but at least you'd be all listening to the same content. What do you think about that?
I completely agree. It helps to have someone steer the ship. Otherwise, you can get just going in circles. Specifically, if you were to do topics that could potentially be related to each other, let's say you started with generic inquiries and you wanted to move to the report writer, it might be interesting to have one where you did generic inquiries, then you showed people how to export those and import them into the report writer, and then run from there, and how to change it now in the report writer that you've taken your inquiry into something a little bit bigger. And that would definitely take guiding, because if you had an entire community, I know that we would just sit there and run in circles talking about different nuances, whereas like you're mentioning, if you had a presenter, they could kind of guide the conversation and go, now that we've discussed those side topics, let's push ahead and actually export this to a report and run it from there. That kind of stuff.
And I think there still could be
stuff.
And I think there still could be both going on, but this is where it might go off the rails and lose focus. There'd be no problem with someone creating whatever discussion topic they want to talk about whatever they want. It could be unrelated to what's being presented. But it sounds like you would appreciate at least having core content to rally around and discuss around, knowing that there could also be tangential conversations, which to me would be just fine. Maybe, what do you think? You think that'd be too distracting?
See, I don't mind the tangential conversations, and in fact, they oftentimes relate. They may go off the beaten path, but it's somewhat related normally. I mean, you've spurred this conversation, but I like to have somewhat of a focus, so I at least know what I'm coming at. Like I said, again, if you were talking about inquiries and then suddenly somebody jumped to the accounting module, I wouldn't be able to contribute as effectively. And that might be an event where I would rather be a spectator or get a recording or something of that nature of it, rather than actually participate, rather be a spectator or get a recording or something of that nature of it, rather than actually participate directly, versus if we were talking about reports and generic inquiries, or you wanted to talk about importing and exporting, I can do that all day. And I would definitely sign up for those conversations because I know that I could contribute properly, if that makes sense.
That's great feedback. Yeah, and I think, on augforums.com, since I'm going to focus on the reporting tools for the foreseeable future, maybe I would just do events around that. And I even struggle to call them events because as soon as you go to a quote event, it's a lot of work to put on an event. I'm going to try to minimize expectations as much as possible. It'd be more of a communication facilitator meeting in a sense. So there's as little prep as possible, so they could be put on more frequently. Would be my idea. And then how we can. Sorry, go ahead.
I was just saying, I think that's fantastic, especially with you moving into the report writer. There are so many fun topics to start on, but easily hit tangents with, like using a sub-report. The first time I did that is so difficult to do. And I wish I would have had a big group discussing it so that I could have heard people talk about, hey, don't just call the sub-report. What if you want to pass a variable? How do you call that back and forth? Or, hey, can we call that variable? I want to see what a string looks like instead of an integer value. Does that change anything? What happens if you want to manipulate it back and forth? How could I accomplish that? And those would all be tangents to the basic idea of just showing a sub-report. But I think that would allow people to say, hey, I have a use for this. And now that I've got everybody here right now, does anybody know if this is possible or if there's a quick answer? Because I know that's frequently where most of us are at, is like, hey, I was just wondering, and you move in from there.
So continuing on that thought, let's say we did have the mechanism. I think it comes down to tools, right? So last week, AcuConnect used a tool called Hopin, hopin.to. And it was a cool tool in that you had the presentation going on, you had the chat window. As I mentioned, the chat, it's very flat, right? You can't really go tangential or you're cluttering up what is really one conversation. If we just used augforums.com and the existing forums, we could do that unseen list for you to see which conversations are going on but then they'd be organized by discussion topic. Now, the annoying thing, though, is with the forums, you have to keep refreshing the page to see any new things that have been added to it. So that'd be the downside of it. But if we did that,
yeah, that's fair.
I did discover that we have to keep refreshing the page to see any new things that have been added to it. So that'd be the downside of it. But if we did that,
yeah, that's fair.
I did discover that we could do a YouTube live event that's hooked up to a Zoom call. I haven't actually tried it yet, but it looks like it would work, so that you could actually have even a guest on or a couple guests. And so let's assume we could work it out with a YouTube live event so everyone's seeing the same broadcast, and we could bring people in using Zoom like we're doing now for this audio recording. You could share your screen, etc. What are your thoughts on length? So, just to keep it simple, I was thinking just to go for an hour and try to do it once a month. And then you're probably just talking about one presenter, maybe two. But then it comes down to finding presenters and not wanting to be too much of a burden, wanting it to be more off the top of your head so I could get more people to do it more free. Some of my thoughts. What do you think about some of those details?
So I like the idea of giving yourself a time frame, but I would also love the idea that if the presenter, let's say they finished their task, didn't necessarily close down the entire event in case there are tangents running, it would be awesome if they were like, hey, we totally watched the show, but then for the next hour, a group of us were busy arguing over this one part of it, or trying to solve a small segment that was slightly not related to what the presenter was doing, but still related to the topic overall. This way people still have access to it, because a lot of times I found that, if it's a 1 hour meeting, at the end of the meeting, they close it down. You're like, well, I still had questions. I guess I'll hit it next time. I would like to avoid those type of scenarios where you could say, hey, presenter left, but the meeting's still open until everybody closes out kind of situation. I'm not sure if that's available to you. Honestly, I've never used the YouTube live feature myself, so don't know what restrictions or advantages you have there.
Yeah, my thought on that is you would use the YouTube live event purely for the broadcasting of the audio and the screen share. There's also a chat window there, but my stance would be there'd be no reason to use that except for real simple stuff. All the conversation would happen in the forums just like it does normally. That way, there'd really be no event concept to what's going on in the forums, other than people just know that they're all going to be in at the same time. Then it survives the event just like a normal conversation does.
That makes sense. So using the event to kind of spur forum topics almost that are tangential or even directly related to the topic at hand, and then moving from there. And that makes perfect sense because that doesn't give you a stuck time frame. And if somebody has to jump early, this also gives them the ability to be part of the conversation, but admit that, hey, I could only stay for 30 minutes. Here's where I'm at. Can anybody help push this along in the forums as well? And I think that would give you multiple jump early. This also gives them the ability to be part of the conversation, but admit that, hey, I could only stay for 30 minutes. Here's where I'm at. Can anybody help push this along in the forums as well? And I think that would give you multiple outlets, and it's always better to have more accessibility, right?
Then I think the only downside of it to me is that things don't pop in without you refreshing the page, which is a little annoying, right? So you have to keep hitting F5 on your keyboard to see if anyone has chimed in on the discussion topic. But otherwise, I think it's a good way to communicate in a way that is as open as possible. And to a point you made earlier, someone might find that conversation with a Google search a year later and add to it, right? It can be found just like any other conversation can.
Yeah, in fact, I think we've had that similar experience on the AUG forums before. I know I've seen some topics come back from the dead, and I'm like, what's going on? Like, oh, there's been an update with the new Acumatica that doesn't apply anymore. You need to do these steps now to solve that problem. And that's fantastic that you can see if you're running an older legacy system, or if you just updated and you don't know why it's breaking, you're like, oh, that was the method I was using. This is the new method. I can do that.
I've experienced the same thing. Yeah, totally agree. So I think I'm going to give that a shot. I like the idea of having something to present. That's a lot more work. That's the downside. But, maybe if I just did like 2 half-hour time slots as a way of, you wouldn't have enough time to go end to end. But the reason I'm thinking that is with AcuConnect, I did a presentation last week, and it was just 30 minutes. And what it really forced me to do was really pare it down to just the essentials. And you're not covering something end to end. You're just you're almost starting a conversation, right? That can be continued in the form. Maybe that was.
Yeah, I'd be open to something like that. Feel free to shoot me some information as you get a little more concreted in that area, because I think there's a big benefit to the community to seeing like closed loops, right? This does this entire topic, and if you have more, go to the forums, post more. We'll be there to support you shortly. But for this 1 hour, we're just going to go over how to quickly add in a sub report or whatever the case may be, right? We're going to show you how to do complex grouping, something like that.
And then when it comes to the new official community, where I think most of the conversations are going to happen going forward for anything outside of reporting tools, at least, we'll have to see how we can incorporate that. Or, I know Acumatica listens to these podcasts, and, obviously they took a lot of the ideas from augforums.com forums and incorporated it into their forums. So we'll see what they come up with. Or, I know Acumatica listens to these podcasts, and, obviously they took a lot of the ideas from augforums.com forums and incorporated it into their forums. So we'll see what they come up with on their end. My stance is, in my opinion, you don't really have two competing communities. You just join both, and join the AcuConnect one as well, join Stack Overflow as well. And I think naturally you'll just feel out when you wind up posting in one place versus another place. The community is really not a website, in my opinion. It's not a software tool. It is the people. And whether you interact in one place for some things and another place for other things, doesn't matter. To the point you mentioned earlier, you saw Gabrielle already on the community.acumatica.com site. And the community is that you've interacted with him before or read his stuff before. It's not the site that you found him on, So I think...
No, I completely agree.
All of augforums.com, so I'm thinking of ideas there. But really, we're contributing to the broader community, and we might have ways to bring in the other sites as well and different things.
No, and you mentioned something that I think is rather important about Acumatica versus other software development companies. I mean, they're obviously here to make money, but unlike most of them, they really do listen to their users, and they're happy to adopt the things that we constantly complain about. And I think that's fantastic. I mean, obviously, we've all used Microsoft. I mean, if you're in the office, you're using it. But there are many times we've all hit that wall and gone, gosh, I really wish I had this thing. And you just know Microsoft isn't going to care. They're just not going to help you with it. Whereas Acumatica, I have really seen them bend and flex based on their user needs. I mean, I was at a launch event not too long ago, and they were talking about how they added a whole new thing for construction companies. Not my field. I don't care, but I'm really happy that they listen, that they have such a large subset of construction customers to support that. And I was like, thank you for paying attention to what's going on instead of saying, look what I made, use it or don't. And that can become very frustrating when you get into that situation.
I totally agree. Acumatica is very customer centric. And I think that's where we're just seeing how long that lasts, right? I hope it lasts for the next 20 years. We'll see. I think one thing, the biggest thing to watch there, in my opinion, is John Roscoe. I mean, to me, he is the number one reason why that culture is there. And since Acumatica got acquired last summer, usually when that happens, the CEO has some kind of earn-out period, right? 3 to 5 years, something like that. And we'll see how much longer John Roscoe is around for. The longer, the better, in my opinion. After that happens, if they get acquired by someone else, if they go public, that level of transparency by someone else, if they go public, that level of transparency could suffer. We don't know, right? But I think that's another reason why I'm not shutting down the content on augforums.com. I'm going to focus on the reporting tools, but that everything else forum is going to stay there. And I moved all the other conversations into that forum, so they're still there. And that could come back in a few years if people find that Acumatica is losing that transparency. But for now, I completely agree with you. It's been great.
Right, and I certainly hope they don't. I believe in my mind that's the curve, right? And we're going up and everything's getting better. And if you stop listening to your users, that's going to be that critical point. where things might still get better, but it's going to slow until they stop getting better. And then you're going to be stuck in that cardboard box scenario instead of an open field to work on whatever you need. And that's going to be a frustrating day when that finally comes around. And I'm hopeful that that is not anytime soon. And like I said, I've been at it for 3 years, and all I've seen is falling in line rather quickly. They were using Excel before we started, and now they're using an ERP system, and everybody's like, wow, you can't just screw this up. Like, it actually has checks and balances. It will yell at you, like, you have negative inventory, don't do that. Be like, okay, won't do that, you know? It's so great. Love this platform.
And I'm still hopeful that it never becomes a problem, right? I just watching ERP systems for decades is why I'm pessimistic. But I think there's also a case to be made that software companies think differently now. They realize the economic advantage, I think, a lot more so now than they used to, of keeping things transparent and continuing to listen to your customers, that there's profit in that. And I'm just hopeful that it continues that way and that the investors continue to see that instead of just turning it into a siphoned off cash cow, right? You just look at historical products, that happens. But, you know, hopefully we've turned the corner on that from a business model standpoint, and hopefully it never turns into that.
Yeah, I'm hoping those are days gone by and that everything just goes nice and smoothly, because it really is a changing field in general. And I'm finding that from professional software to even personal entertainment software, the user feedback is starting to become a critical part of every company's core values. And I'm thinking that's fantastic for just the market in general.
I want to get your take on one last thing, and that is I put something on the top of AUGforums.com recently called Rolodex, and kind of coming back to trying to duplicate that experience of an in-person event and really thinking about what is the real value you get out of that in-person event. We've talked about the conversations, and to me, the other part of it is just seeing who's in the room. And so, not yet, but it's just a list of anyone who's got an account on AUGforums.com. If they've populated 3 specific fields, your first name, last name, and an about field, which is 255 characters long. So you can put whatever you want into that about field, put your website, what you do, your background, what you specialize in. And it's just a way to give a list of not just the names, it's also got your location on that list, and it's also got whatever 255 characters you wanted to put out there. And the idea is just to see who else is in the room, so to speak, in the Acumatica room. Just curious to get your thoughts on that and maybe ways we can improve that list.
Actually, that's fantastic. This is the first I've heard about it. I just loaded it. Looks like I need to add more info to my profile on your site.
Just curious to get your thoughts on that and maybe ways we can improve that list.
Actually, that's fantastic. This is the first I've heard about it. I just loaded it. Looks like I need to add more info to my profile on your site. I'm not on that list, which is a shame because I'm more than happy to be available to anybody who hits that wall. And I think that having that kind of data available is fantastic. If you know somebody's in your region, they're suffering the same things you are. Like, especially now with COVID and trying to follow certain restrictions, if somebody's in the same state as me, that can make a big difference on how I'm trying to plan certain things or how I'm implementing something. You know, hey, I've got all my users remote. We can't all be next to each other. How do we communicate this? What are we going to do with that? And I think that's going to be a fantastic outlet. Like I said, I haven't had experience with it, so I can't give too much feedback on it, on things that I would choose to improve on it, but I will definitely be attempting to use it here shortly.
Yeah, check it out. It's just a list, nothing fancy, but you can see where people are, and then which you may or may not know about, that you can actually, we may have used it back and forth. You can click on someone's name and send them a message as long as you're logged in, and just communicate one-on-one that way.
Nice. That's fantastic.
Well, cool. I appreciate you going over. Anything else you'd like to bring up with thoughts in general around community?
No, actually, really the community here is just stellar. I would not change anything for what we have with our current community. It's just been growing, and everybody seems to be an active participator. I haven't found anybody really attempting to be toxic or cruel to one another, which is fantastic because that has happened before on other platforms. It's been super open. I haven't seen anybody get shot down. If you've got something to post, even if you think it's stupid, post it. Most people have been there. It's a first-time mistake almost every time, right? So bring it on.
Great closing thoughts. Hey, Michael, thanks for making the time. I know you're a busy guy, but thanks for coming on today.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me.
All right. Well, that's it for now. We'll catch you on the next episode of AUGforums.com Real Talk.